Mostly been me putting the membership together, but part of my membership are out of the box tutoring resources for phonics. So that includes 90 phonics lessons, 90 vocabulary pre-teach games, assessments, reports, certificates, all of these things.
Hello, my name's Jenna. I'm an online primary tutor, and today I'm talking to Sandra from Jigsaw Phonics membership about how to quit teaching and become a tutor. If you are a tutor watching this video, please let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for joining me today, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me.
Thank you very much. So we came across each other on Instagram and we had a lovely chat, and it was really nice to get to know you because what you are doing is totally different to whoever else I have chatted to. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear your journey and see what you've been up to. So if we start at the beginning, you were an international teacher. How did this come about and what did you do?
Well, I have always been in education in some form or another, but actually my tutoring journey started way back when I was a TEFL teacher in the UK, teaching students from all over the world who came to the UK to learn English. And that kind of took me into publishing for learners of English as a foreign language. So I moved into lexicography then. I moved to Oxford and I was one of the dictionary compilers on the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. And it was really useful to have had that teaching background. And then I also moved into teaching, and then life took its course and I moved to Germany and I became an international teacher in Germany. And often I think what happens in life is the things that you've done in the past kind of build up to, decide the future that you're going to take. So I decided that I would stay in teaching. It was a really interesting international bilingual school. And I think, like a lot of people watching this, after about 15 years in the classroom, very much of it I loved. It felt like a season of life had kind of come to an end, and then I wanted another challenge. So I stepped out of the classroom, and now I run my membership for phonics tutors and early literacy teachers.
Oh, now before we move on with that, which is amazing, how did you become a TFL teacher, the TEFL teacher? What was the process for that?
It actually happened because I did my degree in linguistics and phonetics, and I was finished a term early. The exams were finished, but I still had accommodation for a term in London. I was a student at UCL, and I wanted to do some traveling. So I thought, what's the best thing I can do to travel? I can teach English as a foreign language. So I went and did my English as a foreign language training in that final term that I was at university after all the exams had finished.
And how did you find that experience?
It was brilliant, actually. I think that in terms of ways of teaching and learning how to teach, I think, teaching English as a foreign language has always really been very much at the forefront of teacher training. So it was an incredibly good experience. And it was just, again, this international environment. We had to do our teacher training practice with people in London, the whole, from all the other countries who couldn't speak English. So it was just always this international environment, which I've always loved.
That's really interesting because I've worked with international students, and obviously you have to get over that language barrier initially. And with teaching them English, that's because when you go into teaching, you go to teach a class of children and you don't have to think about that aspect of teaching and the context of the lesson and the wording and the phrasing. So there is a lot of steps before that to come across that. So did you learn like different teaching strategies as part of your training, which you could then take forward with you?
Completely, completely. And I spent 15 years in a primary school teaching children who, often didn't really speak English as a native language. And it's something that I've also brought into my membership as well. And I think one of the key things that you need to do, and it's a kind of a super simple thing, but it works really well, is just pre-teach the vocabulary for any lesson that you are then going to teach. Because when the children or when the learners, understand the words, they can make meaning from the learning. So simple tricks and tips like this that I learned from teaching English as a foreign language, I've kind of taken through my whole teaching career.
That's a really good tip with the vocabulary, because sometimes you do presume that a child will know what you're talking about. And I've presumed in my career, you've gone into a classroom presuming that they know about something, but then when you ask them, they don't have a clue. And that is a learning process for you, as obviously as well as them. And then being an international teacher, was there anything that surprised you about that role that was different to what you expected?
Not so much surprised me, I think. But I think what you have to work with are the different cultural backgrounds that everybody comes from, which I loved because you just have to keep an open mind. And the biggest mistake you can kind of make is to make assumptions because, the way it works for me isn't necessarily how it works for somebody else. So you have to keep communication really open and make sure that you're all on the same page somehow because it's just not obvious. What's obvious for me coming from where I come from is not obvious for people coming from very many other places around the world. So that's a thing where you can fall into some holes, but it's also the thing that you can really work to be aware of and to avoid when you've got these very different cultural expectations going on.
Now, you did move on to working as part of SLT, a senior leadership team. And I imagine that was quite handy to learn what you were just talking about, then moving into this role. What was your role and what did that involve?
It was lots of things. I was head of English, I was head of special educational needs, I was head of admissions. And it was really great training. I think what it really taught me, especially being head of admissions, because the school I worked in was a bilingual international state school. So it was not a private school. No money changed hands. And so, of course, we had a waiting list from here to forever. And it was really a great lesson in being able to say no diplomatically because there were so many parents pushing very hard to get this children into the school I worked in because it had, a brilliant reputation. The exam results were excellent. It cost no money. So you can imagine the pressure of parents to get their children into school. And I think I learned 100 ways to say no very diplomatically when it just wasn't going to work out. So that's one of the main things I take away from it.
That's a really good skill, because I think often when you're a teacher, especially in primary schools, you have to take on a subject lead role, and you're not always really prepared for that. And going from a teacher role to a subject lead role, you obviously are looked at differently by other members of staff. That happens naturally. And then to go up even further, and that again changes the whole perception of you to staff changes and your role, because when you're a teacher, you just rely on yourself, don't you? You're responsible for your assessments, for your work, but then as you get further up and you take on those responsibilities like you did, then you have to learn to manage people. And managing people, like you say, parents or staff, can be a whole learning curve. What advice would you give to people in going into a senior leadership role who is finding that overwhelming?
Oh, it's difficult, isn't it? Because so many environments are so different. Where I was, it was actually quite good because I would do some things, I would do some teacher training, I would do some curriculum development work. And we had just a very nice set of colleagues on the whole. We were all from somewhere else. It was an international school with international teachers. And we just kept the hierarchy, I think, very flat, and people just did what they could to help and support. So I never really had the idea that I was some kind of manager at a different level to people. I kind of saw my job as somebody who could coordinate things to make it work for everybody. And I know that that's absolutely not the case in other schools, and I don't have any experience in UK schools, but certainly in my international school, it was actually quite relaxed and quite non-hierarchical.
I've spoken to other people who have worked in international schools, and they've said similar to you, that it was a very collaborative environment, whereas now, unfortunately, in UK schools, from my own experience and from other teachers' experiences, it is very much the boss and then everyone else below. And obviously we know a lot of teachers are leaving for various reasons. Now, what made you then kind of look outside of teaching and look elsewhere?
I think you get to a point, I mean, I'd reached a point in the school I was in when there was nowhere else to go because, you know, all the positions were already filled. And I kind of reached a point in my life when I thought, do I either settle into just being a teacher, or do I say just being a teacher? It's an amazing job and it's a responsible job, but do I just keep going on this track until the end of my working life, or do I take this time now to branch out into something different? And I think lots of teachers are kind of quite creative, and I had a bit of a creative streak in me. And I thought, I'll make the change now because, you know, it's if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I decided to step out of the classroom and took a little bit of time to decompress, did a little bit of traveling, and then decided to set up by myself, but started originally by publishing some literacy activity books, which turned into the phonics scheme that I then created, which then turned into the membership that I run now. And I have to say, when I left the classroom, it was not my intention to run a membership for phonics teachers. But I think that's the nice and the interesting thing that can happen when you make a change and when you decide to set up by yourself. You know, your business is probably going to take a route that you probably couldn't have imagined right at the beginning, because, you know, it's always a work in progress and it's something that develops over time. So while I never intended to set up a membership for phonics tutors, it's actually been brilliant. So it's been a good career path, really.
And were you tutoring while you were originally doing your literacy books?
With the jigsaw phonics, I was
Yeah, when you
I have,
initially
yeah.
left.
I'm a qualified dyslexia specialist. So the tutoring I've always done has been specialist dyslexia tutoring mostly, because there's a big
Oh.
demand for that. And now I do other tutoring. This is going to be confusing. I'm a tutor for English as a foreign language in something completely different. So I also do tutor, and I do tutor online. But I also help teachers to transition from teaching into tutoring. And I help those teachers who are primary teachers who have a real love for phonics and early literacy. So that's what my main work is.
I like that, because often when you do see memberships for tutors, it's not common that the founder of that membership is still tutoring. And it is for some, don't get me wrong, but mostly it isn't. But I like that you have that, you know, that first-hand knowledge, so that when you are working with tutors, you can say, look, this has worked well for me and it's been successful, and this hasn't worked. Because you do, when you start a business, it can be overwhelming. And like you say, if you're starting on your own, you're like, it can be really, really scary. So let's just step it back a bit, regarding your role with being a dyslexia specialist. How did that come about, and what interested you in doing something like that?
Lots of things. My degree was in linguistics and phonetics, and my research already when I was an undergraduate was in how children learn to read and spell. And I volunteered for a while in London as a teacher for adults who had literacy difficulties.
Mm.
Um, and then and so it's always really been an interest of mine. I have a child myself who is dyslexic, so I know it from, you know, the
That's
theoretical point of view, the point of view of being a parent. And then when I became a teacher in Germany, particularly with students who don't speak English as a foreign language, it was just so clear to me that you will walk into any classroom of 30 children and 3 will absolutely be on the dyslexia spectrum. And I don't think any kind of teacher training really gives you a good enough insight into dyslexia. So I just thought I need to do something here. So I set myself up as I was an online student for this actually. And it was the course run by Dyslexia Action at Middlesex University. And what was really good about it, and it was a lot of work, but I could study while I was working in the classroom.
Oh, okay.
And so I had this nice perspective of being a teacher, being a parent of a dyslexic child, having some background in dyslexia already. And it was just such an incredible insight. And it's fed really well into what I do now, because part of my membership includes an assessment, and it is not in any way, shape, or form a dyslexia assessment,
Mm.
but it's really been informed by best assessment practice. So that when the tutors in my membership get started, they always start with an assessment with the child. So they always know exactly what level a child is working at, because I think one of the biggest questions when you're tutoring is, but how do I know what they can do? Or how do I know what they can't do? And how can I find that out? So, in my career, everything has kind of fed into everything in the next level.
And how long did it take to do that qualification to become a dyslexic
It
specialist?
was over a year, I think, over a year. And uh, yeah, you could do different modules and you could bolt extra modules on. But I did the module 2 that allowed me to assess for dyslexia. So that's the level 7. Um, yeah, it takes quite a while and it costs quite a bit of money. But I think once you've done it, it's just such an amazing insight into language literacy, how children learn, and best practice to help children to learn. And basically, at the end of the day, if you would teach a class as if everybody in that class were dyslexic, you would be serving everybody, because what works for dyslexics works for everybody else. It doesn't, sometimes it does need to be a really detailed intervention, but generally in your general teaching practice, there's a lot you can take over to do in the classroom that will help everybody. So it was a good general training as well.
I think when you do train to become a teacher, you are taught, in my opinion, about the basics. And I mean the basics, because when I trained to be a teacher and then actually got my first job, there was so much I didn't know about at all. And certainly nothing to do with like SEN or anything like that. And that was a massive learning curve, and still is now as a tutor, because obviously different children you work with, every child is different, whether they've got dyslexia or whatever it is, whether they're dyslexic or whatever it is. And you're constantly learning, because every child is unique and you follow their path to help them. So I do think for teacher training, there could be other units put in place so that teachers have a decent toolkit before starting. So it's good that you took it upon yourself to think, I need to know more about this. It will help me, but it will also ultimately help every child that I teach. Was that a regular thing with other staff? Did you notice? Did other teachers do it that you worked with at the time, or was it just something that you did?
Not so much, not so much. But I think the good thing is to at least have 1 or 2 people in a school. And my colleague also did the same training, under her own steam, really. And then I think if you at least have a couple of people in a school who can give you perhaps a more detailed insight into what's going on, because you're exactly right. When you're talking about children with, learning differences, they might be dyslexic. The first thing I ask myself as a dyslexia specialist is, what else is going on here? Because quite often it's dyslexia, but it could also be, maybe there's some ADHD, maybe there's some dyspraxia, maybe there's somewhere on the autism spectrum. It's quite rare, I think, to find a child with learning differences who's just got the one thing going on. So that's basically what I did. I would go and support other teachers to find out what's going on with their learners. And then we would sit down and we would put together an intervention program that the teacher in the class could work with to help support that learner. And it's often not anything revolutionary that the child needs, but sometimes you can just point at a few things that might help, small steps that build up over time that generally help to improve their progress. I mean, there are definitely some children who do need withdrawal and tailored intervention, but quite often teachers can do a lot in the classroom. Teachers do a lot in the classroom already, but sometimes it just helps to have another pair of eyes on what's going on to make some suggestions.
And it's nice to have that person to come in and be like, oh, just tweak this a little bit and just do that a little bit. Because when you've got no knowledge, Because obviously when you go into a class of 30 children, as well as whatever educational needs they may have, there's the family needs, the everything going on in their life needs. And I've said it to others before that, you know, when you train to be a teacher, all you have in your mind is the lesson. But then you have to soon learn, as soon as you walk into that classroom, if one of those children aren't quite right, there's something not gone right the night before or something like that, or there's the learning need and you're teaching and obviously it's not appropriate for that child, you have to adapt really quickly. And if you don't have that bank of knowledge like you have with the with your training, then a teacher can feel overwhelmed. So to have that one person come in and be like, oh no, just do this and do this, imagine that teacher's going, phew, thank you, I know something's not 100%, but I don't know what to do. So that's a really good
Yeah, but
culture.
honestly, sometimes even when you do know what to do, you can be overwhelmed.
I know, especially when you've got and classes are so big now.
Yeah,
There's so many children and so many, like you saying, a child doesn't normally have one thing that they need support with. And for a teacher and a TA, if they're lucky to have a TA, to have that many children with variety of needs, and often a lot of them don't have the training. And that's a massive thing at the minute, especially TAs, they're just given a child to work with, but there's no prior knowledge, no prior training, and they're simply just doing their best. So it's lovely that you had that role to support those people and help
hopefully,
them.
yeah. It was. I think it's definitely in a school needed. I think it's, you know, more training and more people. You know, the ratio of adults to children is the thing that brings everything up for everybody.
Yeah, but moving forward then, so you told us about your books and then you obviously it progressed onto your membership. So what did your membership look like in the beginning? Was it just you or did you have anyone helping you or how did it look?
It's mostly been me putting the membership together, but part of my membership are out of the box tutoring resources for phonics. So that includes 90 phonics lessons, 90 vocabulary pre-teach games, assessments, reports, certificates, all
Wow.
of these things. And I kind of like Canva, but I needed a designer. So I've got there are two of us actually in the team. So there's Barbara, who's in the office in Wales. She's the designer and she has designed everything so it looks absolutely
Oh,
beautiful. So the lessons and all the, you know, the homework, all the extra resources are just there and just ready to go. So it's me putting the membership together and Barbara actually making it real by doing all the design and the branding work and the, you know, creating all the resources.
oh, that's amazing that you've got. I love Canva. When you said Canva, I love it. You know, you just see
We needed a
you
bit more
see
of a
any
Canva.
tutor, they've got loads of, you're like,
Yeah.
no, that's a Canva one, that's a Canva one. But you do need to, I think when you are starting running a business, a lot of teachers, me included, when you first leave, and sometimes if you haven't left in the best way or you've had a negative experience, you're like, I want to do it by myself. But to, you know, get better, you have to collaborate. Like one of the first things you said to me on the chat was, I love collaborating with other tutors. I love collaborating with other professionals, you know, helping each other out. Because I think people do want that support, but they just don't want the toxic side of the support, unfortunately, what many teachers have gone through. And I love that when you messaged me and you said, I love collaborating with other
Yeah.
people because it does make your workload easier and it can also you know, if you're in a stressful time and you're like, I don't know what to do, someone else can have the answer just simply by a comment. Would
I
you
haven't,
recommend other
yeah,
people to
I
get
haven't,
other people to help them?
yeah, I haven't done anything, I don't think, without collaborating. You know, just because you need a kind of a sound, and we can do a lot by ourselves. But I do think it's, you know, the Jigsaw Phonics membership that I run is an absolute collaboration with Barbara and some other people who keep it ticking over in the background. My own tutoring business, which I don't talk too much about, is also a collaboration with somebody who is amazing. And you know, we've all got different skills, but we all kind of, and nobody's particularly better or worse at anything, but we've all got our strengths and our weaknesses. And if you can surround yourself by people who've got the strengths that you don't have, then you can just benefit from the help and the advice that they can give you. I do think we do get, as teachers especially, we're in that class by ourselves. We get so used to doing it by ourselves. We just think it's kind of the only way. And I would always say, get some help somewhere. And I'm not even talking about paid help, but just collaborate with somebody who you can throw some ideas around with, who, they can support you, you can support them. It just makes it so much nicer.
Mm. When did you originally start then the membership? When was the official launch date?
We're into our second year now.
Okay.
So yep, we're into year 2, and it's a really nice community. I think that's the thing about memberships, is you can get the support and the help and the resources, but you also just hook into your group of people who are doing exactly what you're doing. They're on the same journey as you. And we get together regularly on live group calls, and it's an opportunity for some training, for some sharing some ideas, hearing how this is going here and how that's not going, and what you might change, or what's worked really well, or what's been really successful. So you really can ask others, what did you do? How did this work for you? What's happened there? And just lots of light bulb moments when other people are just doing exactly what you're doing. So I think it's really invaluable.
And are there any other ways that your membership has progressed? So obviously you've said now that you've got a lot of members, you're doing the group calls, you're doing that collaborative work together. Is there anything else that's different from when you originally started?
I think what some of the members are doing is they are taking the brand, the Jigsaw Phonics brand, and they're
Oh,
starting to create their own resources
oh,
with the characters and with the ideas. So the one thing I would always say to tutors is, have a think about other income streams in your tutoring business.
right.
I mean, for sure, tutoring is probably going to be your main income stream, but why not think about creating other resources that you can also sell, which would add value to your clients, and that would, bring you some extra value. So there's one member at the moment who's got phonics tutoring packs, which are all designed around the Jigsaw Phonics characters, and so that's bringing in an extra income stream to her and adding extra value to her clients. So that's the kind of thing that is really helpful. Another one is going to open a Facebook group, or is currently opening a Facebook group, so that she can support the parents of the children that she tutors. Because of course, as tutors, we've always got this 2 level of clients. We've got the children that we actually tutor, but then we've also got the parents, especially, for primary school tutors. That's really important. And I think to be able to offer that double level of support can be really, really good. So they're branching out in lots of ways.
That's really good. One thing we did talk about before we started filming was group lessons as another way to obviously,
Mm.
and we had quite a detailed conversation about how to pitch them right. So what would be your best tips for group lessons? Because there are do's and there are definitely don'ts.
Okay, so I think when you're pitching group lessons, the first thing you need to do is you need to niche. You need to become known as the real specialist in what you are offering. So most of the tutors in my membership are known for phonics lessons. And then once you've niched, you have to decide what model you want. How many students are you going to have in that group? What's going to be your maximum? What are you going to charge? I think one of the big mistakes that tutors can make when they go into groups is they charge low. They go too low. And if you're charging a really minimum amount per child in the group, you've got 2 problems there. Parents don't really value what you're offering, so you're probably not attracting the kind of clients that you'd really like to work with. And if you're really going low in your price, you're going to have to attract such a massive volume of students to even get close to what you might have as a one-to-one rate for your tutoring, that you're going to have a marketing machine that is going to be an incredible thing. And I think we often default to that retail model of pricing. It's the kind of pile it high and sell it cheap. That's what we're used to seeing. And because nobody ever teaches pricing in any way, shape, or form, everybody thinks, okay, well, I'll do that. I'll rock bottom prices and I'll get lots of students in. But that turns out, I think, to be really hard. I think that's been a little bit of your experience, hasn't it? You were saying.
Yeah, it's hard work, the low cost big group. It can be, if it works well, it works well. You can have great lessons, but it is the relentless advertising that you have to do to keep filling those spaces. So if you are considering doing groups, make sure to really, like Sandra said, really focusing on pricing, and because often you can see lots of other tutors doing different things, and you think, oh, I should be doing that. Right, let's do it. And you copy exactly what they're doing, but you don't really know behind the scenes what's going on, and whether it, like what we see on social media, isn't necessarily what is going on behind the scenes. So it could look great on paper, but behind the scenes, like that analogy, the duck pond and all that kind of stuff, your little feet are going, and it's not always the best way. So yes,
and I mean, the reality in my membership is that groups often have the kinds of advantages that one-to-ones don't have. So, children can learn from each other. They're not always in the spotlight. You've got a wider range of activities that you can do with the children in groups. And, there's so much value in that. I think a lot of what we have to do when we're marketing our groups is to get over the default gold standard for parents. It's kind of one-to-one in-person tutoring for an hour. And actually a 30 or 40-minute group tutoring session online can have other advantages that parents aren't necessarily aware of. And I think the trick is, if you've got groups and if you've got one-to-one tutoring, is don't make it, if any kind of price differential, don't make it a massive one, because then you immediately devalue group tutoring, when often there are very valuable things happening in there that might not always be happening in one-to-one. And I mean, that's been the experience of a lot of the tutors in my membership.
Yeah, I think it is lovely when a group lesson works really well, because I've had classes with 10 children in, and it was really nice. The collaboration was incredible, and the conversations were lovely. The learning opportunities, children learning from one another. So when a group lesson does work, it's so nice. It is really nice, but it's just getting that balance. But I don't think, obviously with your membership, you give that core support, that do's, that don'ts, which is great, because when you come out on your own, you don't know what to do. You don't know how to do things. And again, like I said, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It could look great, but behind the scenes, not so much.
And I mean, we don't always get it right. I think in any business, in any situation, and I think that's what's brilliant about being a teacher. You're always kind of learning on the job.
Yes.
And I've spoken to tutors who have maybe a combination of one-to-one with a child and a child in a group situation. And one-to-one, the child is an angel. In a group situation, they just aren't. So you can kind of never judge it sometimes. You have to sometimes take it on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, we're finding that the groups, with that interaction, with that variety, are really, really valuable.
So looking at your membership, it's obviously going very, very well. What would be one real high point for you from your membership? And on the other spectrum, what is something that has really surprised you and you didn't really expect? And not necessarily negative, but just to be realistic with people, because businesses aren't smooth sailing. There are things that, catch us out. So one positive and one not so great one that you've had to learn from and overcome.
The biggest thing that always gives me an absolute thrill is when tutors come in and they have used the resources that I have, created and developed, with all their amazing teaching and tutoring skills for sure.
Wow.
And they talk about the breakthroughs in reading that children have.
Wow.
And that gives me such a, with this child who 3 or 4 months ago couldn't read this or couldn't do this, has gone through this program, and can now do it. So that is my complete and total utter thrill. That's the absolute highlight of the whole thing. And the thing from the business side of things, I think the real thing is that you probably don't need as much as you think you need. It's a bit less is more. So the tech that I kind of took on in the beginning was too much, and I've reduced it. And the amount of stuff I had in the membership was too much, and so I reduced it. So I think you need probably a bit less than you think you do. Less is more, back to basics, and just don't overwhelm yourself and everybody else by thinking, more is more. Keep it low tech. And I've got now, I think tech is also the thing. I've got the 2 or 3 tools that I really like. Often the free versions of tools. I mean, the thing about starting a tutoring business is in one way it's never been easier, because we've got some amazing tools out there that we can use to run our businesses. Often the free versions work absolutely fine. And yeah, so I think the overwhelm is something, my own overwhelm and the tech overwhelm, just bring it down back to basics.
I think that goes back to what you said about niching though, because when you first start out, you just want to do everything. And that's a thing I think is from teaching, because you weren't allowed to just focus on teaching your class. There was, assemblies you had to do, staff meetings you had to do, courses you had to do. So your brain could never, in my opinion, focus on one thing. So you come out with that same mindset and you think, da, 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 da. But then you can, and again, I was speaking to other tutors, you get so overwhelmed and you're just like, wait a minute, just focus on one thing. I've had to take my own this advice myself lately, because I had so many goals starting out. I think, right, just calm down, bring it back to one point, focus on that. Because again, like you say, if you're not known for one thing, then it can look like you're all over the shop, and that's marketing's a whole other ball game. Totally
Yeah.
off the whole, but
Yeah, no, well, it is and it isn't really. I mean, we're such good marketers as teachers. I mean, marketing is nothing more than striking up a conversation with somebody and figuring out how you can help them. And if that's what you're doing, then them deciding to work with you is just kind of, that just happens naturally at the end. I think the biggest mistake you make with marketing is just to sell, sell, sell. You know that you are brilliant at what you do, and you can solve the problem that the people you would like to work with have, but their journey getting there is going to be a bit longer than yours. And so you have to nurture them, be on their radar, open the conversation. And if you can sort of play the slightly longer game with them, in a very natural way, just helping, supporting, communicating, and then you're on their radar, and then they'll come and help you. I don't think in a certain sense it's a lot more complicated than that. It's just that we see it from our point of view of, yeah, of course I've got something that you should buy, because of course it will solve your problem. But, I'm brilliant at what I do. Buy from me, and that's just, you've got to kind of slow it down, and you've really got to look at yourself from the point of view of the clients that you would like to work with. And I think that's basically it.
It does come down, they always say about relationships, building that relationship with your audience so that they know you and know you before they speak to you. And I've had that actually from a few tutors on my YouTube. They're like, I already know you from watching your videos, which is kind of weird when people say it to you.
Yeah.
But like you say, you want to build that up, and it's a long game, and not being too impatient, because things do work out in the end.
They do. And one of my many mantras is, clients come from conversations. That's marketing.
I like that. That's quite good. So just got a couple more questions before we finish up. Now, kind of stepping back, if there is a teacher who knows they want to go, but they're overwhelmed, and it's a massive step, and they've got an idea like you, they want to go into tutoring, maybe something extra, whatever it may be, what advice would you give them?
You're talking about me and every member in my membership there. What I would say is, don't overthink it. When you decide to do something different, 80% of it is a mindset and confidence game. So try not to overthink it, and take action. which is actually exactly what I did with this membership. I am the world's, I've got an Olympic gold in overthinking. But when it came to this membership, actually, I just thought, I think I'm just going to open a membership for tutors. I've got all this lovely phonics stuff, and kind of did it. And sometimes it's actually just quite good just to take some action, because, if you really know, if you're really passionate about something, if you really know about something, if you're an expert in it, it will work out, comes to point two. If you are going to decide to tutor, niche, niche, and niche, because you want to get known for what you do. If you do too many things, people get confused, and confused people will not buy from you, if you're trying to teach all the subjects under the sun. So niche, 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 I would say. Then what you need to do if you're going to start some kind of business is get your processes kind of sorted out. So your branding is, have a think about how you want your business should look. Think about the kind of tone of voice you're going to use with people, and think about how it feels to work with you. And that's a lot of all your processes under the surface. Also, don't be cheap as chips. You've got to charge a fair rate that will keep you in business, because if you cannot stay in business, how can you even help anybody? It's not about self-preservation, which it also is, but it's about getting sustainable so you can keep helping the people that you need to help. I would say don't do it alone. And, that doesn't necessarily mean pay for some help. It just means get somebody on your side who you can collaborate with, who can be a sounding board. And I also think get out of that all or nothing mindset. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to leave teaching, jump into the abyss, and then try and get something else sorted out. What lots of members in my membership do is they have a transition. So they say, okay, I'm going to leave teaching. I'm going to get my business set up while I'm still teaching, or while I'm doing some supply. Or they say, I'm going to leave teaching, I'm going to work in this other business that I love, and I'm going to build my tutoring business up from there. So you don't, it isn't all or nothing. It's not like, oh, I've left teaching, what now? You can transition it. And I think if you've got the headspace for it, the smart move is to start building up your tutoring business while you're still teaching. Think about maybe reducing, doing supply, and then build up your tutoring business until it tips, and then you can tutor full time.
Yeah, that's good advice. A lot of tutors will go from permanent to supply to tutoring, which is the path I took. But yeah, definitely don't just go out into nothing, because I have seen a few people say that they've only been advertised in a few weeks and like, oh, I've had nothing. But
Yeah.
like you say, it's the long game. It takes time. You've got to build it up.
It can take a while to replace your teaching salary, but I've spoken to members in my membership who are doing supply and tutoring to build up the tutoring to move, and they say, I actually earn more doing tutoring and supply now than I did as a full-time teacher. So this transition, I think keyword transition is the thing. Unless, of course, your mental health and you're suffering so badly, sometimes you do just have to get out, and then you do, have to throw yourself into something new. But I think transition is a nice way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. So finally, thank you very much for joining me. Where can we find you and your membership? I'll obviously leave your details down below as well.
If you just look for jigsawphonicsmembership.com, you will find my website, and on my website you will find everything about the membership and all the links to all my socials and other things, so you can always be in touch with me through all of those. So I say first up website, jigsawphonicsmembership.com.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've learned a lot from you, and we'll keep in touch, obviously, which will be lovely. But thank you very much for watching this video today. And if you liked today's video, please make sure to subscribe to see who else I'm chatting to.
Thanks so much for inviting me.